Alright guys, I just wanted to show you a little of this old beam I got here. This actually is a new old stock beam from Volkswagen, believe it or not. It even still has the original stickers on it. You can see right here, made in Brazil, and this is all the information on it. 1200, 1300 cc cars. See, this beam was made sometime around probably 1964, 1965. I'm taking a stab at that because right here you can see is the Auto Union mark. Now, Volkswagen didn't purchase Auto Union till '64, and I know that in America they stopped using these in late '65. By the time '66 rolled around, they had another beam. They used the ball joint beam, which had on the end of here, instead of being connected by these link pins here, they actually had ball joints. You know, they'd have one facing down, one facing up. If it was the bug, of course, they had different. This one is considerably more complex. I mean, you have the spindle carrier gusset right here. You got link pins which shim up, and then you got your spindle actually right here that's on its own set of bushings. There's a lot of parts right there. The ball joint beam simplified that out considerably. This is going to be going into a off-road Sandrel, or a woods buggy, if you will. And I got started laying out stuff right here for cutting and turning. You know, this is actually just paper just taped around, believe it or not. I didn't have any masking tape, so hey, paper works as well. But you just cut right along these lines here and, you know, rotate it 1/4 inch, rotate it till this line matches up with that line. And then you just lock it down, clamp it down. You can clamp one side and then weld the other side, and you can make it a one-man job if you want. Some people tear these things completely apart, you know, they take the arms off and everything. This is new old stock. I don't see a need to do that, you know. When you're welding along here, this beam is going to conduct a lot of the heat away. Inside here there's a really nice solid piece of metal that holds the spring packs that go all the way across here. So that big chunk of metal in there is going to it's going to absorb a lot of the heat. And so, you know, you don't have to really worry about the spring packs getting, you know, heated to the point where they're going to take their temper out. You know, a few hundred degrees ain't going to do that. What that does is that will allow these pivot on these arms right here. It's going to drop lower. And I had to take this bump stop off here. You know, this would have been sitting in here like that, right? But, you know, this is in the way, and it keeps these arms preloaded. You know, and if you take this off, then when you cut in the center here, you know, it's not gonna snap, which that just makes it even harder to turn, you know, because then you're gonna have to turn it back to center where it was, and then, you know, the extra however far you turn it. I'm gonna do 1/4 inch. But these, you know, and that'll drop down, and the shock. These will have a shock that attaches here. And then there'll be shock mount up here. I'll extend these about 4 inches, gusset them a little bit. And but you still don't want the shock to compress to the point where it's gonna smash into itself. So these are just gonna get, you know, re-welded right on here. And you can see that I've marked them and everything where these are gonna go. You know, spindle carriers, off-road. This section right here will kind of bend. If you hit something hard, it will kind of fold up like that, because this spindle is going to push up when it hits a bump into this. And now this pulls on this right here. And so it shares the force between these two arms. But all the force that goes through this arm goes through this member right here. And if it's not gusseted, it can start to bend like that. And that's bad news bears. So, you know, I made a little cardboard template here. You know, this will just sit on top of that like that. And that puts more material farther out from center here, and that makes it a lot harder to bend and fold up. These will have to get gusseted as well, because these are really thin. I mean, shoot, my thumb is bigger than that thing. You know, these, if you hit a hard bump, it can bend it in and out like that. Up and down usually isn't a problem, so it's more of putting a gusset on the inside here to keep it from, you know, going back and forth and throwing up your toe and whatnot. I mean, I've seen people bend these to the point where they actually start to crack where they meet this machined edge here. These have edges welded on right here. onto that shock tower and onto here. Those little flanges, they hold a bumper that goes over the front of this, and the bumper, it doesn't actually affix to anything on the bottom, it just slides over these two poles, so it's got a couple tubes that come up like this, and then one that goes across the front, and the front one actually bolts onto those. That's what holds the whole thing in place. One of the other reasons I know it's a later beam is, I don't know if you can see this from this angle, but these two pins right here, those two pins, those are alignment pins for the steering box bracket. Now, that, you know, these steering boxes, they introduced a new steering box in 1961. It had a roller pin in it instead of a gear on a sector shaft. You know, a ball and socket gear like the earlier ones had. So the earlier steering boxes, their clamp didn't have a provision for this, and so they just had one solid clamp. You'll notice the newer clamps, they have two notches in it on either side that fit these round, you know, those round dowels right there, and that just keeps it from rotating on the shaft. Yeah, I don't know why they didn't do that on the earlier ones, but I got the wide shaft here, and the wide shaft gearbox. It's a great gearbox. It's used from sometime in the early mid-50s up to 61. And that will clamp on here. So what I'll probably do is I'll just take a grinder and just grind these halfway across. And the bracket, I'm just gonna figure out where the position of the box has to be, and I'll just weld the bracket on. Won't be a big deal. That'll keep it from ever turning on here or moving side to side or anything like that. Some of the earlier beams had a little issue with that with people that beat on them. On the street, it's never an issue though.